Welcome back now to Face the Nation, and we turn now for some perspective on all of this to former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. Madam Secretary, we're very happy to have you and to get help us to try to understand. Have you ever, I can remember times when the nation I thought was coming apart, 1968 in the battle over Vietnam and all of that, the 68 Democratic Convention. But can you recall a time when there was so much trouble in so many different places around the world?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you, Bob, but I think that the fact that this is happening in so many different parts of the world, we all grew up in a very different era where we were focused on the threat from the Soviet Union, and that was the major activity, and it clearly was dangerous. But what has happened now is that we are seeing problems in a variety of places, some of it due to globalization, frankly, which has an opposite side that has created a lot of nationalism in those countries that, or places where people feel lost within kind of the facelessness of globalization. And then because of technology, because there is so much connectivity, but also not an understanding of all the various pieces of the news that come into us.
But we have so much going on right now. It's almost like we're caught up in events out of control that we haven't until this second, when I'm going to bring it up, had time to even talk about the shutting down of the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli, Libya, because these Americans there were caught in the middle of basically a fight among militias. I'm happy to report that they all got safely out. Secretary of State says that's just temporary, but almost no attention to that. We haven't talked very much in the last week or so about what's going on in Syria, of all places, and that is just a slaughterhouse, apparently.
Well, there are two really different things going on, and I think partially, Bob, in diplomatic world, there's something going on all the time, and it is the job of diplomats to manage it. But there have been really two huge game changers. And one is Putin's behavior vis-a-vis first Crimea and then now towards Ukraine, and a completely different kind of behavior by Russia. And the other is what is happening in the Middle East, a lot of it due to the Arab awakening and also the artificiality of the borders that were established after World War I. So these are huge game changers, and we are, a lot of Americans, trying to figure out where the countries are. Most Americans knew very little about Islam. They certainly didn't know a difference between Shia and Sunni. So there are an awful lot of things going on that need understanding and explanation. But to put it mildly, the world is a mess.
What is your take on Putin right now? What do you think he's up to? What does he want? How can we get his attention? Because right now he seems to be thumbing his nose at us, even though we continue to put sanctions on him.
I think that Putin is living in his own world. He has made up an awful lot of lies in terms of who is responsible for the fact that the Soviet Union disintegrated. He actually called that the greatest disaster of the 20th century. Hard to believe when there were two world wars that killed millions of people, among them Russians. So that's the first lie. And then he has, in fact, propagandized all that through his own country and then into Central and Eastern Europe. I think what he wants to do is to reestablish himself as the identification of Russian nationalism, and then also to do everything he can to kind of reestablish something akin to the Soviet Union, obviously not that, but a grouping of countries around Russia that are completely subservient to him and to Moscow. And until he can get that, he's going to work to destabilize Eastern Europe.
Talk a little bit about what's going on in Israel right now. If you were the Secretary of State right now, what would you be telling the President? What can the United States do here?
Well, let me say, I so admire Secretary Kerry for all the effort he's put into this. I think all of us as secretaries had worked very hard on it, but it is a tough proposition. We actually know what the solution is. President Clinton laid that out before he left, and a two-state solution and a number of other aspects to it. The United States can put down all kinds of plans, but until there is political will between the parties themselves, it's very hard to have anything happen. But I think Secretary Kerry is doing everything he can at this moment to kind of prolong the short peaceful ceasefires or humanitarian ceasefires, and then see whether he can get them back to the table. But the problem, as we heard in the Charlie Rose interview, is what are the preconditions for even getting to discussing the conditions? So it's a tough sell for everybody.
But you know, listening to the Hamas leader talking to Charlie Rose, and he said, yes, we can coexist with the Jews. But he said, we can't coexist with the Jewish state. And Charlie said, well, but how do you go for it? Well, he said, we'll decide after we get our state whether we can coexist with the Jewish state. It sounds to me like these two sides are as far apart as they have ever been.
I think they are. And certainly that sounded like a double talk to me, but the bottom line is they are seeing each other's problems from a completely negative side, when what you need to do in diplomacy is at least try to put yourself into the other person's shoes, and they are definitely not doing that. And they are propagandizing. The Hamas is definitely trying to persuade its population that everything is the fault of Israel, which I think is unfair. Israel has a right to protect itself, but I think that they are far apart. They are definitely.
Is Israel in danger? And I talked to the Prime Minister about that this morning. I totally understand his point of view. In fact, I agree with it. No country would allow another country or another group of people to fire rockets in there. But as these horrible pictures continue to come on television, are they in danger of losing this battle for world opinion because they're winning?
I think the quote that you had from Golda Meir is so stunning, and as you pointed out, it could be said today. And then there was this incredible movie called The Gatekeepers, where a lot of military people had really were so sad about how they had been made to be more cruel as a result of a lot of the things that were going on. I am concerned about Israel. I am a great believer in the security of Israel and the moral authority of the Israelis, but I am very worried about what is going on in terms of their image.
Let me ask you about something else and how things look on television. The president has gotten a lot of criticism lately for going to all these fundraisers. Every time you turn on the TV, he's en route to a fundraiser, even though these horrible things are happening around the world. Is that criticism fair? If you were in the White House now, would you say, Mr. President, maybe you ought to dial back a little bit on that part?
I don't think it's fair. I do know the following thing, that a president does not travel alone. Not only is there a lot of equipment that goes with him that allows him to be in contact, and he has his advisors around him. I also do think that we do not want to operate in a way that the United States kind of decides that there's nothing we can do until, unless of course it's foreign policy, and I disagree with that. I do think that the United States has to be engaged. I have believed that. I have called us the indispensable nation, which means that the U.S. has to be at the table. And the president, I know, has been on the phone. He has been working in a number of ways to push, and you can see that in terms of not just the phone calls, but meetings and a variety of ways. So I don't think it's fair.
You know, rightly or wrongly, and I take your point, there is a perception, it seems to me, that in many parts of the world there is an impression that the United States is somehow stepping back.
I read that myself, but I don't believe it. I think that the thing that has changed is we don't want to be the world's policeman. The American people don't, and I think that what has to happen is to really work harder on the variety of partnerships. When I said indispensable, again, not alone. It requires partners. It requires sometimes being at the table speaking first, sometimes speaking last, motivating others to do the things with us. And in the first part of the program, you talked a lot about Europeans. The president has been pushing the Europeans. The Europeans have to step up. I am appalled, frankly, at the slowness of the Europeans in understanding what is going on in Europe itself, in being not only supportive, but being genuine partners in pushing on what Putin is doing, on supporting Ukraine, on making clear that the kind of behavior that Putin engaged in is illegal, and that we have a responsibility together, and the United States together with our partners, I think, is very much in the lead.
Madeleine Albright, it's always great to get your perspective. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We'll be right back.